Okay, so the situation on the front line is all over the place depending on where you're looking. On some parts of the front line, you're seeing Ukrainian advances for the first time in those areas in a long time, when the situation was quickly deteriorating in the other direction. I mean, maybe not quickly deteriorating, maybe like, I don't know, I want to say slowly, but like in between medium deteriorating, I don't know. Deteriorating as in everyone could see the general trend that it was headed towards. It's particularly, for example, with the battle in Chasiv Yar and Toretsk. We're going to talk about too, but on other parts of the front, we're also seeing the Ukrainians face immense pressure, the most pressure they have faced on that front for the entirety of those offensive operations being conceived of and being engaged in. And I'm of course talking about Kursk right now, which is being attacked by the Russians with immense force. This comes after, thank you for the $5, Turbo Chief, I appreciate that. This comes after the Trump administration announced that it was withdrawing not only military aid to Ukraine, but also intelligence assistance that would assist it when it comes to not only the targeting of Russian units that are fighting it in Kursk, but also when it comes to certain drone and missile information that the Ukrainians could use to derive, hey, they're going to strike this city around this time, or hey, we should be alert around this angle or around this time when they strike, because maybe they're going. And that information was being restricted in order to add pressure to the Ukrainians, because Trump is seemingly confident from his public statement that the Ukrainians are the ones that are the problem when it comes to peace negotiations, that it's the Ukrainians holding it up, that they're being difficult, that it doesn't really seem like Zelensky wants peace. I've talked about Donald Trump's, I think, interesting framing of Zelensky and the war a lot. I don't want to have to touch those bases again. Let's just look at another recent comment Trump made to get an idea of it.
Look. He took money out of this country under Biden like candy from a baby. It was so easy, with that same attitude. And I just don't think he's grateful. We gave him, in my opinion, $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. We gave him $350 billion, and he's talking about the fact that they have fought. And there's a bravery because somebody has to use the weapons. But without those weapons, don't forget, I was the one that gave him the javelins that was able to knock down all the tanks. Obama gave nothing. Look, if I were president, that would have never happened. You wouldn't have had Russia going into Ukraine. You wouldn't have had the whole situation with Hamas and October 7th. It would have never happened because Iran was broke. They had no money. They weren't giving it to Hamas or Hezbollah or anybody else. You would have never had the worst evacuation anyone's ever seen, which
I'm sorry, how expensive are paragliders and AKs really? I'm October 7th was not an extreme. October 7th was a lot of things. A very expensive operation is not what I would put at the top of the list. Putting aside all of this, the general idea is that Zelensky took America by its pocketbook, took all this money from us. He's not being grateful, and now, we're taking all of this away, and he's trying to add pressure to Ukrainians to get them to the negotiating table, but not to actually get them at the negotiating table, because they're actually not welcome at the negotiating table, but to talk to Trump and accept the terms that he thinks is acceptable for them, which includes no security guarantees. Or if you want to be cheeky and you want to, rub the Ukrainians' nose in it, you could say, oh, how about you giving us your resources is actually a security guarantee of a type. Now, not only is that a very interesting way of framing you enriching yourself off the situation, but I also don't think it's a security guarantee. Oh no, there's an American semi-owned mine here. We can't invade Ukraine because I believe it's essentially a part of Russia. We can't, because there's a mine here that's owned by America, and if we capture it, America will bomb us. I just don't think it's credible. I don't think it's credible. It comes almost with the same naivete I hear of, like, oh, economic liberalization of China will lead to political liberalization. That was a naive viewpoint, and I think it's naive that just because we have some economic integration with the Ukrainians, that's going to save them from a future Russian invasion. It's just a simple answer because he doesn't have an answer for security guarantees. Either way, because the Ukrainians want to hold out for security guarantees, And because Trump had that blow up meeting where JD Vance and Donald Trump
is
really
occurred.
blew up at Zelensky. The Ukrainians are still holding out in Kursk, but the pressure they're under right now is immense. The Russians are attacking them from every side they can, and it seems that what the Russians are doing is they're trying to take advantage of the suspension of American intelligence support for Ukraine and military aid to Ukraine. Even though the military aid impact is not going to be felt immediately, the intelligence support cut can be felt immediately. And there's even reports that this cut actually was before, or was leading into it before, the meeting between Trump and Zelensky even happened. So connecting it to that doesn't even seem accurate. I was talking about that earlier, but this is something that it seemingly the Trump administration were thinking about for a bit. Either way, the Russians are trying to take advantage of the situation. They're adding immense pressure on the Kursk right now, and they are advancing. And I like the way that Reuters reported it here. Russian forces advancing Kursk and curl behind Ukrainian forces. I think this is the best way to describe what's happening to the Ukrainian forces in Kursk, is that the Russians are curling behind them. So this is the position as of 12 hours ago. This has been updated as of 12 hours ago. This is Andrew Perpetua's. I'm always bad with his last name, but this is his map, Ukraine daily update. This is his map. I prefer it. And as you can see, the Ukrainian positions up north, which were here not too long ago, have been advanced upon. The Ukrainian positions have retreated from them and have been pushed back closer and closer to Sudzha, which is still controlled by the Ukrainians here, and so they're being pushed from the north. Okay, the Russian units are curling behind the Ukrainian positions. They're first advancing in the north here, where the Ukrainians have had to retreat from, advancing southward. They've pushed the Ukrainian positions in the west backwards, closer and closer to Sudzha, and they've been hammering the Ukrainian positions up north here. They've also curled behind the Ukrainian positions to the south here, putting a bottleneck choke on the withdrawal point for the Ukrainians, which is this road and these points here. If you are a Ukrainian soldier trying to withdraw from Sudzha right now, it is fucking hell. It is shit. It is awful. I have no way other to describe it, but if you are trying to leave or go into Sudzha right now, you're going to be hit with drones. You're going to be hit with artillery. The Russians are throwing everything they can at you. And the reason they're throwing everything they can at you is they're doing everything they can to strangle this.
Well, too bad, JK Law.
Thank you. They're doing everything they can to strangle this and to strangle this line into Sudzha so they cannot reinforce it. So when they send wave after wave of North Korean or Russian soldier into the Ukrainian positions on top of motorbikes or on top of armored vehicles, BMPs, tanks, T-72s, or golf carts, whatever it is, you might be able to mow down a few lines of those men. You might be able to hold your position for a bit. But if you're not being reinforced, or the men that are coming to reinforce you are coming with like 20 to 30% casualties or something. I don't have any numbers, but the idea that they're coming there, and by the time they get there, they have like 20 to 30 or some amount of percentage of their men already wounded. So the reinforcements that you are getting when they do come are going to be more damaged. They're going to maybe have less equipment depending on what supply shipments are actually getting through and not being blown up by Russian drones. And the men that do get there are going to need medical treatment. For the men who get through, are injured, survive, but are going to need, some amount of medical care if they're going to be able to make it through to a medevac out of Sudzha. So getting into Sudzha and out of Sudzha is absolute hell right now. It's shit. And the thing is, honestly, it's been like this for a bit. This is not a new update. I just haven't done a segment specifically about how this road right here is a death road. But if you want to get an example of how this road is a death road, I think I do have a picture right here from the map update, and I know Andrew pointed this out, from February 25th. Look at those notifications for strikes on Ukrainian vehicles. And remember, this is before they curled around their positions. This is before they've retreated from the north. This is before they've gotten the pressure from the west. Well, they were getting pressure from the west pretty hard here. They were also getting some pressure from the east here, but not compared to what they're getting now. So this has been a concern for a bit. This has been a problem for a bit. The people who have been tracking Ukrainian losses or go in and out of Sudzha have been pretty open about how shit it is to get in and out of Sudzha because of the fact that, you know, there's not a lot of cover here. And let me tell you, right now it's wintertime. It's not wintertime really anymore. It's starting to slide into spring, you know, but the foliage is still not there. There's not a lot of areas to take cover. You've got to floor it in order to get from point A to point B. I tried to get into Sudzha, I don't know how many times. And each time that I would try to get into Sudzha, the reason it didn't end up working was that it was just like, dude, it's too dangerous this day. These many cars have been hit or these many things have been hit. And, you know, there's nowhere for, you know, we just don't think we can take you in and keep you safe. And it's not just a problem of me being kept safe. It's also about, you know, if I get hurt under their watch, then they're in a lot of trouble. Point is, though, it's been bad for a while, and this is not only something that is showing when it comes to, you know, the pressure that the position is under now, but it also we also need to comment like on the cost of personnel generally. If it costs this much to get your units into a position, that is a cost that you are taking upon. Okay, it would be less costly for people to make different travels to different parts of the front line. Not all parts of the front line. Some parts of the front line, no matter what. I mean, most parts of the front line is going to be dangerous going there, but this one has been under particularly hot pressure. But the Ukrainians have decided to stick it out. And despite everything we're hearing right now and everything we're seeing about the Ukrainians losing the positions up north, from the Ukrainians losing the positions of the west, from the Ukrainians losing the positions in the east, and now them curling behind the Ukrainian positions here up to this force line, which then threatens their passageways back into Sudzha itself, and then, of course, threatens those in Sudzha with encirclement. As this is all happening, we're getting announcements from the command saying there's no threat of encirclement, and that we're hearing that they're going to reinforce Sudzha. Let me read some of this from you. This is from the Armed Forces General Commander Syrsky. Ukrainian units are not currently under threat of encirclement in Russia's Kursk Oblast, Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky said in March 10th. Syrsky's statements follows reports on Russian and North Korean troops launching an attack on the Ukrainian-held town of Sudzha in the Kursk Oblast. Russian forces have made a breakthrough south of the Ukrainian-held town of the Sudzha in the Kursk Oblast, potentially threatening to cut off some of the Ukrainian positions in the Russian region. Russian troops have destroyed Ukrainian troops' logistics in the Kursk Oblast, and Ukrainian soldiers face the risk of encirclement. A Ukrainian soldier and medic deployed in the region told the Kyiv Independent on the condition of anonymity on March 7th. There is currently no threat of encirclement of our units in the Kursk Oblast. The units are taking timely measures to maneuver to favorable defense lines, Syrsky wrote on Facebook. So this is what he's using to describe the retreat from these positions up north. Oh, they're moving back to more favorable defensive positions. They're retreating from these positions. Oh, they're moving to more favorable defensive positions. That is a very nice way to put retreating. And it might be true that they are retreating to more favorable defensive positions, but it still is retreating. And this is not a favorable position. This is a breakthrough. This was not something that, hey, the Ukrainians have decided that it'd be good if you took this right now, so we're just going to withdraw. No, there's no logic, military logic to allowing your enemy to get this close. So this is a breakthrough of some sort. That doesn't mean the Ukrainians haven't fought to contain it. That doesn't mean it's going to spiral over into a complete encirclement, but this is not a organized withdrawal right here. Ukrainian forces control the situation on the border between Sumy and Kursk Oblast, according to Syrsky. Yet several settlements on the border no longer exist as they've been destroyed by the Russian attacks, he added. Russia has been suffering heavy losses in both personnel and equipment, according to Syrsky. Near the village of Plokov, Russian forces lost an infantry battalion in 4 days of fighting, he said. Ukraine's commander-in-chief added that he had decided to reinforce Ukrainian troops in the Kursk Oblast with the necessary forces and means, including electronic warfare and drones. So, as we talked about earlier, these units are getting intercepted as they're working in Sudzha. If they're going to reinforce Sudzha, it cannot be at such a massive loss. They're going to lose troops along this road, that is for sure, but they need to reinforce it with some sort of mechanism to protect it from drones. Whether that means doing what I've seen some of the Russians do, which is putting drone nets along major roads which they're traveling, whether that and I don't think that's going to be an end-all fix, but I mean, it's something. Whether it means more electronic warfare devices over this area, more stuff to jam the drone signal, if that's necessary, then that's what you have to do. But there has to be more to defend the passageway into Sudzha. Now, this would be something that I would hope an American administration might be able to work with them with. If you were Trump and you were negotiating through an actual philosophy of peace through strength, maybe you could think, hey, Russia, it'd really suck if the Ukrainians started getting more and more reinforced in Sudzha. Wouldn't it suck if we started giving them this mechanism, and, strengthen their position, so the only way you could get it back is through negotiating? So you had to negotiate, so you had to give up things that you wanted, unless you were okay with the People's Republic of Sudzha turning into a Ukrainian town. That's how you would negotiate peace through strength. You'd be getting terms that the Ukrainians could live with, and therefore go into peace through strength. But we're not getting anything like that. In fact, we're getting the aid cut off, we're getting intelligence cut off, and the Russians are trying to take advantage of the situation. Whether the Ukrainians are going to be able to salvage it, I do not know. Now, I think that there's two ways you can go about it. There's two ways you can go about what Syrskyi's saying, okay? The first way you can go about it is the upfront approach. Is that what Syrskyi is saying is the truth, that they're going to reinforce it? And if they're going to reinforce it, it's just not going to be more drones, and it cannot just be more electronic warfare. It's going to also have to be more infantry to hold these positions and to aim rifles at those trying to storm into the trenches. Whether or not they have that infantry available right now, I'm sure they could pull it from somewhere, but other points along the front need infantry as well. They need support as well. Now, by the way, you can see that the Russians are also trying to put pressure on the border here to help with the encirclement. You can clearly see the encirclement they're trying to develop. And so if you're going to stay here, and when you have a manpower shortage, the last thing you need is some of your best manpower to be encircled in Sudzha, being punished for their daring raid across the border. And so, yes, it's going to need more infantry. So they're going to need more infantry. They're going to need more air defense. They're going to need more electronic warfare. They're going to need more resources that are scarcely available. And while the Europeans talk about big defense commitments, what can they get to the Ukrainians as quickly as possible? Enough to change this battle? Probably not. They're going to have to use what the Ukrainians have on hand. And so hopefully they have enough in reserves to reinforce it, if this is the approach that they're taking. And I know it would feel like, God, under so much pressure with that road looking as deadly as it is, why do they want to hold it? And it's just simple. They want the leverage. They need the leverage from their perspective in Kyiv. If the Russians hold on to all of their territory, the Russians, with none of their territory being held, could just lay back and say, we don't need to negotiate anything. Just accept the terms as they are. You're not allowed to enter NATO. You're not allowed to do that. And so not only do they not have defense agreements, they're not getting their land back. They need leverage that the American government currently is refusing to give them. So they have to attain it other ways. If the American government is not going to reinforce them, they're not backing up Ukraine. They're cutting off their support structures. They're encouraging the Russians through their behavior. If not, maybe not their rhetoric, but certainly their behavior. If you cut off the support, they think, great, if we were able to advance with the United States, Europe, and Ukraine fighting us, now that it's just Europe and Ukraine, it'll be much easier. It'll be much easier. So I think that them holding on to Sudzha is still in the interest of leverage and politics, and I understand, but they can have this manpower somewhere else, more effective and better defensive positions that have had more time to be properly prepared. But as Clausewitz said, politics, war is an extension of politics, and that is true. And there is a political end to the war, and that means them trying to get the best deal that they can, and they need leverage for that. And so that's what they could be aiming for still, even under the pressure that they're in. Now, there's also another way to look at this. It could be complete bullshit. It could be that Syrskyi is saying that we're going to hold Kursk, we're going to hold it, we need to hold it, we're going to reinforce it with this, we're going to reinforce it with that, so that they are, putting up basically, a big chest-pounding effort, putting up this fog of information, as the Russians maybe are trying to gather more forces to try to make a final push, as the Ukrainians slide out of Kursk, preserving their manpower, and then redeployed it to other areas where it's desperately needed because they're afraid of an encirclement. And considering that the United States is undercutting its support, it doesn't know how long this, the Ukrainian government doesn't know how long this war is going to go on. Without American support, they're going to need every man and every uniform they can get. So that's the two ways you could approach this. It could be that they are going to stay here and they're going to dedicate themselves to it because they need the leverage. They need the leverage that would come from holding Kursk and be able to trade it for whether it's land or something, who knows. Or the Ukrainians are in an extremely difficult position. They need to preserve all the manpower and equipment that they can, especially since they don't know where the end of this war is coming. And so they're going to withdraw from Kursk, and this is a smokescreen, as it were, in order to give them a cover for withdrawal. Now, this is not the only frontline update we have. This is the one that is probably most concerning for the Ukrainians, and we don't know what the future of the Ukrainian leverage holding operation into Kursk is going to be, whether they're going to see that endpoint of trading it for their own land. But we do have updates from other points along the front that we just have to check out. A big update that we have to talk about is now Chasiv Yar. The Russians have been taking some pretty tough losses. They've been trying to advance, but everything that I'm reading from Chasiv Yar is that the drone attacks on the Russians have kind of stopped them from capturing the rest of it, and it's been pretty devastating for them. But the big news, putting aside Chasiv Yar or the fact that the Russians have not been able to, finish the capturing of the city, another huge piece of news is what's happening in Toretsk right now. What's happening in Toretsk right now, I can only describe as where before I said that it could be they're taking back land. It could be that, the fog of war is lifting in positions that were previously disputed are now clearly defined as controlled by the Ukrainians. It could be that they took back a few streets. Now we're clearly seeing that the Ukrainians are taking back more than just one street or two streets. They're taking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe some more. So if we were to go back to say, I don't know, let's go back to the start of February. Yeah, look, let's say we're right here at the start of February, right? In that month of February, the Ukrainians have peppered Toretsk with so much drones, and not only peppered the city with drones, but able to infiltrate and push back the Russian positions clearly from some areas to the west of the city and inside the city. But not only push them back and reclaim territory, as you can see with these blue spots and areas, but also put areas back into dispute as well, further and further, to the point where it seems like the Ukrainians went from controlling 10% of the city to controlling 40 to 50 to disputing something like 60% of the city. And they've done it very rapidly, very quickly. And let me remind you that this is 12 hours old, so this is not a 100% updated map of Toretsk. And this is a pro-Ukrainian source, so mind the headline as you will. It is the Euromaidan Press. But for once, I would not completely describe this headline as just, hyperbolic nonsense. Ukrainian elite units break through southern Toretsk as Russian defense crumble after a 9-month battle. The 8th Combined Arms Army, composed of forcibly conscripted fighters from the Donetsk puppet state, has been almost entirely eradicated, according to Russian sources, creating critical gaps in defensive lines. On March 9th, the biggest news from the Toretsk direction. Here, as the Russian forces in Toretsk struggled to hold their crumbling defenses, Ukrainian troops launched a decisive push into the town's southern micro-district. What followed was a swift and brutal assault as Ukrainian elite units overran exhausted Russian fighters, reclaiming key ground in the battle for control. The goal of the Ukrainian forces is to completely take control of the city and liberate it after their previous counterattack proved successful. The Russian forces in the town have exhausted themselves from almost a year of constant and costly urban combat, exposing weak points for the Ukrainians to exploit. Ukrainian forces have exhausted the Russians by draining their resources and manpower while attempting to conserve their own, and carefully executed defensive operations and offensive raids to compensate for their initial numerical disadvantage. After 9 months of brutally executed defense, this is now allowing the Ukrainians to finally turn the tables and launch their counterattacks from the strongholds they had pulled back to. The main advantage of the Ukrainian forces is they are deploying elite units like Lut. Now, Lut is a police unit. Now, I was actually supposed to be embedded with Lut before I left the country, like 5 or 6 months ago, and I was supposed to be in Toretsk. But like, so let's just say that war is war. People get different plans, and then I was offered something that was like, well, how about this? And I was like, that's not really what I wanted. And then we went our separate ways. But Lut, I know I've been fighting in Toretsk for months and months and months and months and months. And what they are is that they're a volunteer unit of police officers that have come together and have decided that they're going to, instead of continuing to just be a cop, they're going to join the armed forces and join a special assault brigade, a special military unit that serves on the front line. And that's what Lut is. They're basically police officers who have volunteered to put down their badge and pick up a rifle. Okay, so the thing is about the battle for Toretsk and how this is going, this is all fantastic. This is all great, but I do also want to warn you guys that the Ukrainians are taking back parts of Toretsk, but mind you, that the Russians are pushing all along the front line, and so they have a million different areas they have to concentrate on, and so when they lose control of one part of the front line like this, and they start to be pushed back, you can get that because the Russians have so many places they have to be at once that the Ukrainians can concentrate and start to push back a little bit, which is fantastic. And Mercado Media, thank you so much for the raid, buddy. I appreciate that. But that also means that the Russians can just redeploy units over here once they see the situation deteriorating. So don't expect that, hey, they're advancing right now. This is great. This is fantastic. It's going to keep going like that, and the Russians aren't going to do anything. They're going to redeploy units. They're going to redeploy units over there to defend their positions in Toretsk, because if they are pushed out of Toretsk, it will be more difficult to enter the city. Entering the city is one of the most difficult parts of the sieging or fighting or trying to capture a city, because you actually have to get your way into the, urban concrete jungle and possibly like spring from like some open fields or from another location, cross a canal or cross some barrier, a bridge, some roads, some highways that make it very difficult for you. That's where the Russians ran into problems when trying to advance into Kharkiv during the start of the war. They had to advance down these highways where their cars can be seen like for miles across these wide open fields, and so the Ukrainians were able to just take them out as they traveled along these big roads. And so I do think they're going to redeploy units, but the Russians, and this is the good news, because now that I've put my asterisks there so we don't get too excited, the Russians have kept offensive operations through the majority of last year, into this winter, and now into the new year. And I want to give you guys a positive update, because there's been a lot of negative news, but there's one positive update. The Russians were making pretty big gains towards the end of 2024. But as the end of the year, as in October, November, December started to turn around, this fall of Pokrovsk that was immediately expected, or some were worried about, did not come. While the Russians had been operating for months after the Irashny breakthrough in order to try to surround Pokrovsk, did not happen. You can still see, where they're pushing, but you can see where the Ukrainians have retaken this village. You can see that they're holding them there. You can see that they're holding to the south of Pokrovsk, and you can see that their attempted breakthrough towards the west, northward, to surround it from that way, has also been held at this road, and it has been around this area for months now. If you go back, you can see, look at this, for months. Look at this. Now compare this to what was happening before. We could see going into January, going into the start of the year, the end of last year, you can see advancements that are much quicker, much faster. And I've noticed this recently, and I've checked the trends. So towards the middle to the end of last year, you had a lot of Russian gains. After the Arachne breakthrough, there was, of course, the fall of Soledar, the fall of Soldove, the fall of Kurakove, the fall of all these places. Very tragic. Ukraine lost a decent amount of territory. They were losing the most territory that they had been losing since 2022. So that's quite significant. But then, towards the end of 2024, that started to slow down. And the pace of those advances that were terrifying many people in the mid of the year towards Soldove, Kurakove, these locations, it slowed down. In fact, not only did it slow down, it halved. And you want to know what's happened since December going into January, February, and now we're in March? The speed of those offensives have halved again. Now, I'm not the only one to point this out. If you want to hear the specific numbers that, like, these many square miles of being captured, others have calculated this. I believe ISW, the Institute for the Study of War, has calculated this. If you want this more put in layman's term, I believe Perron has released a video in the recent past where he talked about this. I think, in fact, it was his most recent video, actually. Either way, the Russian advances in Ukraine have slowed down, and the amount of armored vehicles they have dedicated to the fight have slowed down in the pace as well. Now, they'll have concentrations or quick attempts at advances, but all of this has slowed down. The reason we're seeing motorcycles, the reason we're seeing go-karts, and the reason we're seeing, and I haven't covered this on the channel yet. I didn't cover this on the channel because I thought it was almost like too low-hanging fruit. But now I've seen it too many times that I have to at least bring this up. The battle donkeys, man. The battle donkeys, man. The Russians have battle donkeys. These are real donkeys that are being used by the Russians to transport supplies and work on the front line. Now look, I am not going to stand here and say that I believe that there's no scenario, okay, where like a horse or a donkey could somehow be the most beneficial strategic tool in the situation, okay? If you are, I don't know, sieging a castle fortress in Nepal, if you're joining the Northern Alliance and fighting against the Taliban as you charge southward on horseback, okay? Maybe there's a few situations based upon super piss poor logistics and the just ruggedness of the terrain. For example, during the battle the Mujahideen had against the Soviets, we transported American weapons and air defense weapons on the back of Chinese donkeys through Afghanistan to avoid the major roads. This is not Afghanistan. This is not Kandahar. We're not in some mountain fortress in Nepal. Okay, we don't need to like fight like Dr. Evil on Mount Doom. This is Eastern Ukraine. This is not even a coal mountain. They didn't even climb a coal mountain, okay? These are people that simply don't have the equipment. They don't have the vehicles. They don't have the vehicles, and so they're now relying on donkeys to transport supplies, to transport weapons, to transport food, and whatever is necessary for these units. Because they just need more, well, I guess you could say, I would say horsepower, but I guess that would not be accurate here. Because this is, what, a third of a horsepower? Maybe mule power? Okay? The indomitable Russian spirit strikes again. Look, the Russians don't have the vehicles that they need to keep the offensive operations at pace to what they were doing mid-2024. They don't only not have the vehicles to do it, they don't have the ammunition to do it. For first time in a while, reports are indicating that the Russians have about double the artillery shells that the Ukrainians do on the front line. Now, for a lot of people, if you're just checking into the war now, that's like, oh my God, double. That's terrible for the Ukrainians. Which, of course, it would be better if the Ukrainians had more. But if you guys were reading the numbers that I saw months ago, when it was like 5-1. In some parts of the front, you were talking like 7 or 8-1. Just devastating differences in artillery amounts. 2-1 is a big difference. And hell, some of them even said 1.5, but I won't buy that. I don't believe it. I'm not going to be that hopeful. So I'm just going to say 2-1. So they don't have the ammunition they need. They don't have the vehicles they need. And to be quite frank with you guys, they also don't have the manpower they need. I keep bringing this up, and I brought this up during my recent debate on, I believe it was Wick's show. And this really, it took them aback. I could tell it took the other people in the conversation aback. They hadn't heard this before. The Russian soldiers that are signing up for service are getting older and older. In Russia, they are not mobilizing the public and deploying them to Ukraine. There was a wave of mobilization in Russia. But the thing is, just because you're mobilized in Russia does not mean they take you and they send you to Ukraine. Mobilized soldiers have ended up dead in Ukraine, technically against Russian law as much as that matters. But widely speaking, you are not sent to Russia. So the ones that, sent to Ukraine. The ones that go to Ukraine, they have to volunteer to go there. Almost every single person that you see in Ukraine, except for the cases where, magically one of these conscriptoviches ended up in, Ukraine, they volunteer to go. Now, that doesn't mean they weren't coerced. That doesn't mean that they were not treated poorly in some way in order to make them go. But the idea is they were supposed to have some element of choice. And this has also made it easier for the Russian public to stomach the war, considering, like, no matter how many numbers you publish of, 5 people died, you can't really hide all of the graves. And the men, I think the average age by the end of 2024, it was 50 years old for the soldiers that are volunteering to go. And the average prices that they're paying down payment for these soldiers to join, $20,000 down payment, $25,000, $28,000. These are life-changing amounts of money for Russians. $28,000 to $30,000 down payment on the spot. That's money-changing. Not money-changing. That's life-changing. Some people are talking about 40K. I don't even need to get to those numbers. Point is, those numbers are high. They're only going to get higher. The ages are getting higher, and it's unsustainable. It's not only unsustainable when it comes to the fiscal sense of how much money you're paying out, the subsidies you're going to be paying out to these people for the benefits after the war, how many people have been mobilized, how many people have been disabled and wounded by the war. It also doesn't make sense when it comes to the long-term increases in the money, not only the money that we're talking about now, but the fact that these prices are going to continuously get higher as less and less people are able to, like $30,000, maybe I'll do 40, maybe I'll do 50. They're going to keep paying out more and more and more for less and less and less. And those people are getting older, meaning not only are getting diminishing returns in the amount of men you are getting, because you're getting 10 men instead of 20 with the offer, you're also getting older men. So the quality of the manpower is going down as well, as we see the average age for the volunteers on the Russian side get older and older and older, where at the start of 2024, it was something like 40. By mid-2024, it was 45. By the end of 2024, it was 50. We can see these ages increasing in real time. And the reason I bring this all up is that if you look at Kursk in a vacuum, the situation for Ukraine right now looks really, difficult, extremely difficult. We don't know if they're going to hold. Syrskyi says they will. They want to keep that leverage. They want that extension of politics that they can bring back and get what they need for a just peace. But then you go over to Toretsk, and the situation's different because the Russians have just been putting their pedal to the metal because they wanted to have as much as possible when Trump entered the White House, but then a deal did not come. And they still had to keep the pedal on the metal because of the possibility of a deal in the near future. And so they want to have the best situation when that deal comes, if it ever comes. But also because, we don't even know if the war's ending in the near future. But if that's the case, you can swing yourself out. There has to be a point where you have to stop and rest. And if you don't, you will gas yourself out. And that might have been what's happened in Toretsk, where the Russians have stretched themselves across so many areas. They've tried to have pressure everywhere all at once under the philosophy that eventually the Ukrainians would break somewhere, and through the sheer mass of manpower, they could find that hole, they could flood it and swarm it in. But when they did have those breaks, they simply did not have the manpower on hand to swarm enough to cause a full breakthrough. With the closest that we have gotten was the breakthrough at Arachne that led to them capturing Soledar and other historic Ukrainian defensive locations, but no large-scale breakthrough that ended the war. That did not come to pass as the Russians were hoping. But that comes at a cost. That strategy, that goal came at a cost, and now we're seeing it from them having to take losses in Toretsk. And if they want to want to keep pressure in certain places, they can't keep pressure everywhere all the time, all at once. They have to choose where the pressure lies. And right now, they're choosing Kursk, and they're trying in other areas, but the biggest success they're having right now is in Kursk. For the Ukrainians, the biggest success they're having right now, pushing the Ukrainians back, the Russians back, is in Toretsk. The only reason I go into so much detail is because I see so much reductionist laziness, ugly, disgusting laziness in this commentary where somebody comes out and they say, Russia's winning, or Ukraine's winning, or and then that's their analysis of the war. And they don't, like, okay, well, what leverage does Ukraine have when it comes to Kursk? What does Kursk mean? Kursk obviously is not all the land that Russia holds, but Russia has to get that back. None of this is discussed in detail on mainstream shows because going into that detail would take too much time and you might lose, it's not as exciting, you might lose the viewership. But I think it's important. These details are important because people can tell that Trump's mishandling this to some degree, but I don't think people realize how much he's mishandling it. It's not that the people don't want peace. The people do not want you to go to the peace negotiating table with a crayon and chew on it as the Russians dictate you their terms because you haven't heard about the battle donkeys. We need to make sure that the peace for this is long and just, because if the Russians can say, we reduced ourselves to battle donkeys and we're still able to get all of our terms while fighting all of the collective West, the lesson they take from this, I don't think it's going to be this was a bad idea. It's going to be if we organize it better next time and we've already divided the West, it'll be a lot easier. So we need to have a concrete negotiating strategy that doesn't treat this like, oh, this side's won or oh, that side's won. And I heard some rhetoric from Trump recently that did give me some insight that he might at least understand the usefulness of this, but he's so inconsistent on it that nobody's going to take this seriously. Listen to this from Trump. Hey, thank you so much for the money. This is from Trump. We want to do anything we can to get Ukraine to be serious about getting something done. You know, I say they don't have cards. Nobody really has the cards. Russia don't really have the cards. They don't have. What you have to do is you have to make a deal and you have to stop the killing. I mean, it's better than just saying Ukraine doesn't have the cards, but he has to keep a consistent narrative, which he has failed to do. And I don't believe he will do. And considering how much his mouth waters at normalization with the Russians, I think the Russians feel confident that they can hold out.